Welcome back to the deep dive. So if you're our listener today, maybe a PhD student, maybe just deeply curious, you're likely wrestling with a core problem in AI research. You're doing that literature review on general artificial intelligence, and you've hit this wall, right? This decades-old issue where the field just can't seem to agree on how we define intelligence or, how we even measure progress towards it.
It's absolutely fundamental. It's kind of the elephant in the research lab, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've had this promise, this dream of human-level general intelligence kicking around since, what, the 50s. But the systems we actually build, well, they're still incredibly narrow, hyper-specialized.
Right. And they need just tons of data.
Exactly. They're data hungry. And maybe worst of all, they're just shockingly brittle. The second you throw something truly new at them, even a little bit novel, they often just fall apart.
So today, we're really diving deep into a pretty crucial critique of all this.
Yeah.
We're mainly drawing on François Chollet's work, which really throws down the gauntlet, challenging the whole way modern AI benchmarks things. And for you, the listener, think of this as your kind of intellectual shortcut. We're going to unpack why the current focus in AI, this obsession with measuring raw skill on specific tasks is, well, the argument is that it's fundamentally flawed, maybe even misleading.
That's the core thesis, yeah.
Yeah.
If we really want to make deliberate, meaningful progress towards general AI, not just stumble around, we need a definition of intelligence that's actionable, something we can actually work with. The way things are now, we measure skill mainly because, well, skill is easy to quantify. You get a score, right? But the problem is, skill can be bought.
Bought how? You mean bought with resources that a human brain just doesn't have access?
Precisely. We're talking about essentially two main ways. One is leveraging unlimited prior knowledge, basically. Hard coding the solution, like in the old expert systems.
Okay, like pre-programming all the chess moves?
Sort of, yeah. Or the other way, which is maybe more relevant today, is using practically unlimited training data, just throwing massive data sets at the problem. This can make a system look incredibly skillful, but it completely masks its underlying ability to generalize efficiently, to take what it knows and apply it smartly to new situations.
And that generalization power, that's the real prize, isn't it? That's what we think of as actual intelligence,
Right.
and that's what the argument says we need to be measuring.
Exactly. So our mission today is pretty clear.
Mhm.
We're going to trace back some of the history, look at where definitions went wrong, then we'll formalize this new perspective, this idea grounded in algorithmic information theory, AIT, that finds intelligence more as efficiency.
Efficiency in learning and generalizing.
Right. And finally, we'll examine the benchmark that Chollet actually designed to try and enforce this new way of thinking, the abstraction and reasoning corpus, or ARC.
Okay, quite a roadmap. Let's start with the context, the history, and why the old ways are being critiqued, the need for these actionable measures.
So let's just ground ourselves in the current reality first. These narrow AI systems, they do amazing things within their little boxes, right? Image recognition, translation.
Yeah, some superhuman performance in specific areas.
Totally. But they are brittle. That's the key word. They fail, often quite dramatically, when the situation changes just a little bit from the data they were trained on or, from the assumptions the creators baked in. They can't just spontaneously decide, oh, I'll use my image skills to solve this logic puzzle now. Not without a huge amount of human help, retraining, re-engineering.
And if the big goal is general intelligence, that brittleness isn't just an annoyance, it's like a fundamental roadblock.
It really is. It means we don't have a clear scientific path forward if we can't even agree on what we're trying to build in a measurable way.
Which brings us to definitions. The common dictionary ones, like the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skills. They sound nice, but they're not useful for science, are they?
Useless for scientific progress, basically. They describe it, sure, but they're not actionable. You can't design an experiment around the ability to acquire knowledge. It's too vague.
And what about the big one, the Turing test? It gets brought up all the time.
The Turing test. Well, the critique here, especially from this perspective, is pretty harsh. Philosophically, obviously, it was groundbreaking, huge impact. But for driving scientific progress, it's labeled a red herring.
A red herring, why?
Because it essentially punts on the problem.
Yeah.
It delegates the definition and the measurement of intelligence entirely. It outsources it to subjective human judges. And the judge's own methods, their criteria for judgment, those aren't defined either. So if the test itself doesn't have objective internal metrics, how can it possibly drive targeted scientific improvement? You don't know what you're optimizing for.
Okay, so we've kind of been flying blind definition-wise since the beginning, and you mentioned this isn't a new problem. These sources point to a history here.
Oh, definitely. It goes way back. I mean, Leggett Hutter did this survey back in 2007, and they were apparently quite surprised that nobody had really done a systematic analysis of all the different definitions and tests out there. And then later, Hernandez Araujo did some really comprehensive surveys, I think around 2017, really pushing for rigorous, maybe even mathematical definitions to be adopted.
But the field didn't really bite.
Largely ignored,
Yeah,
seems to
yeah.
be the assessment, which has led to this kind of implicit, almost inherited bias in the community.
A bias towards
Let's talk about
things like games.
exactly this fascination with high-performance board games like chess or Go, or now complex video games, things where you can get a clear score, a clear winner, single task mastery.
Mm.
And that bias has really skewed research priorities, funding, attention for decades. We keep optimizing for the highest score on this very specific predefined playing field.
Right, which kind of creates this loop, doesn't it? Researchers work on things where the current methods already show promise instead of tackling the really hard foundational problem of genuine generalization.
Precisely. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Okay, so let's unpack that historical split you mentioned. These two different ways people have thought about intelligence itself. First, this idea of intelligence as just a collection of specific skills. Crystallized intelligence.
Yeah, this is the view strongly associated with people like Marvin Minsky, especially in his book, The Society of Mind. It also resonates a lot with certain branches of evolutionary psychology.
Hmm.
The idea is that intelligence isn't one single thing. It's more like a massive specialized toolkit that evolution gave us. Thousands, maybe millions of little special purpose routines, each one finely tuned for solving a very narrow type of problem.
Like having a separate tool for hammering, sawing, screwing.
Kind of, yeah, very specialized functions. And this view directly led to Minsky's famous 1968 definition of AI. You probably know it. AI is the science of making machines capable of performing tasks that would require intelligence if done by humans.
Okay, focusing squarely on the task performance.
Exactly. And here's the irony, the paradox that, according to these sources, still plagues the field. By focusing only on the task, the field quickly succeeded in building systems that could ace the task. Think early expert systems or Deep Blue beating Kasparov at chess. These systems achieved superhuman performance, but did they feature the kind of flexible general cognitive process we normally call intelligence? The argument is no.
Why not?
Because the intelligence wasn't really in the machine. It was in the engineers who figured out the rules of chess, the strategies, the database of openings, and then encoded all that crystallized knowledge into the machine.
So the machine was just a very sophisticated playback device for human intelligence that had already solved the problem. An artifact, not an intelligent process.
Precisely, a static artifact. And that trend, the sources argue, continues today with many benchmarks.
Okay, so that's one vision. What's the other side of the coin? Intelligence as general learning ability. Fluid intelligence.
Right? This is the other major historical thread. Think Turing himself, or even going back to philosophers like Locke and the idea of the tabula rasa, the blank slate. This view sees the mind not as a collection of fixed tools, but as a flexible general-purpose learning machine, like a notebook with blank pages, ready to acquire new skills through experience and learning.
And this led to a different kind of definition for AI.
Yeah, you see it in people like John McCarthy, defining AI more around making machines do tasks they have never seen and have not been prepared for beforehand. It's about novelty, adaptation, learning.
This view seems more aligned with modern machine learning, right? With neural networks learning from data.
It does, and that's where the critique gets really interesting. This perspective was maybe less dominant during the expert system era, but it came roaring back with the deep learning revolution. But here's the twist. The sources argue that this has led to a new kind of cognitive fallacy.
A new mistake. What is it?
The old mistake, from the Minsky perspective, was maybe seeing the mind as like a mainframe computer filled with cleverly pre-programmed subroutines. All structure, no learning. The modern mistake, the argument goes, is seeing the mind as essentially just a randomly initialized neural network.
Yeah.
A pure, featureless blank slate that somehow derives all its abilities purely by soaking up massive amounts of training data. All learning, no structure.
Okay, why is that view considered a mistake? It sounds like the basis of a lot of current AI.
It's considered a mistake because it implicitly assumes or requires infinite resources for that training. Humans don't learn that way. We learn incredibly efficiently from very limited data, especially early on. The human mind isn't purely specialized, but it's also not a pure blank slate. It achieves its amazing generalization power precisely because it starts with some built-in advantages. A set of core, innate priors, basic assumptions about how the world works, hardwired by evolution.
Ah, so things like understanding objects exist or that agents have goals.
Exactly. These priors act like scaffolding, allowing us to bootstrap learning incredibly quickly. Ignoring these priors, or just assuming they can be magically learned from raw data alone if you just have enough of it, that fundamentally misunderstands how human, and likely any efficient general intelligence, actually works. You need both structure and learning.
That's a really key point. So, before we get to the proposed new definition based on that, we need to be crystal clear on this difference between skill and generalization. You said current benchmarks measure skill.
Right. They quantify skill, how well a system performs, on a fixed set of tasks. Think ImageNet for object recognition, or GLUE for language understanding. These benchmarks have driven incredible progress in narrow domains, no doubt.
But they have a downside.
The downside is they inevitably lead to overspecialization. Systems get really, really good at the specific benchmark tasks, often by finding clever statistical shortcuts in the data, rather than developing genuine, robust understanding. They optimize for the test, not for the underlying ability.
This reminds me of the AI effect you mentioned earlier, the moving goalposts phenomenon. How does that fit in here?
Well, the standard story about the AI effect is, once AI can do X, we decide X wasn't really intelligence after all. Chess, checkers, whatever. It's often framed as sour grapes or anthropocentrism.
But the source material offers a different take.
A more technical interpretation, yes. The argument is that this interpretation misses the crucial distinction we just discussed.
Let me push back a bit, though. If an AI system can, say, diagnose certain cancers from scans better than human radiologists, isn't that incredibly intelligent? How can we say that's not intelligence?
That's the perfect example to illustrate the point. When a human achieves that skill, we rightly assume they leverage their general intelligence, their fluid reasoning, their ability to learn abstract concepts, their years of medical training to acquire that specific diagnostic skill. The skill is built upon a foundation of general cognitive abilities. But for the AI system, we cannot make that same assumption. The AI might have achieved that high skill simply by effectively memorizing statistical correlations across millions of labeled scans. It might have built an incredibly complex pattern-matching machine without ever developing any general capacity for causal reasoning, abstraction, or understanding of biology or disease processes.
Ah, I see. So the human path to skill involves general intelligence, but the AI path might just involve massive data and computation, bypassing the need for that general intelligence component entirely.
Exactly. The intelligence isn't necessarily in the final skill artifact, the trained diagnostic model, but in the process of acquiring that skill, specifically the efficiency of that acquisition process, especially when faced with novelty and limited data. That's the core idea.
Okay, that clarifies the AI effect critique. So let's define generalization more formally then.
Right. The basic definition is straightforward. The ability to handle situations or tasks that differ from previously encountered situations. Pretty intuitive. But for actually measuring it in AI, especially in a way that avoids these pitfalls, we need a critical distinction.
This is the system-centric versus developer-aware distinction?
Precisely. System-centric generalization is the standard machine learning definition. It's about how well the system performs on data it hasn't seen before, but which comes from the same overall distribution as its training data. It's basically measuring statistical generalization error.
Okay, like testing on a held-out portion of the same data set.
Exactly. But for genuine AI progress, particularly towards general intelligence, the argument is we need to measure developer-aware generalization. This is the ability of a system to handle situations that neither the system nor its developer has anticipated or encountered before.
Ah, that's a much higher bar. Why is that distinction so critical?
Because it closes the loophole. It prevents the developer from, consciously or unconsciously, baking in knowledge or assumptions specifically tailored to the evaluation tasks. It stops them from hard-coding shortcuts or tuning the system specifically for the test set, which would artificially inflate the performance and make it look more general than it really is.
It forces the system itself to do the generalization work, using only its intrinsic learning capabilities and priors.
Exactly. It enforces a true measure of the system's autonomous adaptation and efficiency. And this distinction helps us map out a whole spectrum of generalization. At one end, you have absence of generalization. Think of a perfectly proven sorting algorithm. It always works, but there's zero uncertainty, zero adaptation.
Right.
Then you have local generalization, or maybe call it robustness. This is adapting to known unknowns within a pretty fixed task definition. This is where current deep learning really shines, handling variations in lighting, angle, or backgrounds when classifying images, for instance. The type of variation is known even if this specific instance is new.
Right, variations within the expected distribution.
Then, a step up is broad generalization, or flexibility. This is adapting to unknown unknowns, but still within a relatively broad category of related tasks. Imagine a system that could learn to solve any kind of grid-based logic puzzle after seeing examples of just a few types. It's generalizing the concept of puzzle solving within that domain. L5 self-driving, if it ever happens, would probably fit here.
Handling truly unexpected road situations, not just variations on known ones.
Exactly. And finally, at the far end, you have extreme generalization, or generality. This is the human-level stuff, the J-doll factor from psychology. Open-ended adaptation across a potentially unknown, vast range of tasks and domains. That's the ultimate, maybe aspirational goal.
Okay, that spectrum is helpful. And you mentioned the J-doll factor. This naturally leads us to psychometrics, the field that actually tries to measure human intelligence. What can AI evaluation learn from them?
A lot, potentially. Psychometrics got some things right, conceptually. Crucially, it focuses on measuring abstract abilities, these broad cognitive capabilities, rather than specific learned skills. These abilities, like fluid reasoning, working memory, processing speed, are seen as hierarchical. You might have heard of models like the Cattell-Horn-Carroll CHC theory.
And how do they measure these abilities?
Critically, they use broad batteries of tasks like Raven's matrices or block design puzzles that are deliberately designed to be unknown to the test taker beforehand. They aim to minimize the influence of crystallized knowledge, stuff you've just learned or memorized, and really tap into fluid intelligence, your capacity to reason, spot patterns, and solve genuinely novel problems on the fly.
Okay, novelty is key. But you said earlier that current AI multitask benchmarks like GLUE for language or the behavior suite for reinforcement learning agents, they don't really capture this.
They generally fail on that novelty criterion, according to this critique. Why? Because the entire set of tasks in the benchmark is known to the developers in advance. Even if there are, say, 100 different tasks, the developers are ultimately optimizing the system to get the best aggregate score across that fixed set.
So they can still bake in priors or do extensive pre-training that's implicitly tuned to the overall structure and types of tasks in the benchmark.
Exactly. It becomes a measure of skill across a wider range of known tasks, maybe, but not a measure of the ability to handle true, unanticipated novelty. It's still measuring skills, just more of them, not the underlying general ability to acquire new skills efficiently.
And we've actually seen this specific failure mode before in AI history, right? With attempts to use human IQ tests directly.
Absolutely. The psychometric AI, PAI movement, you could call it. Back in the 60s, people like Evans tried to get programs like Analogy to solve geometric analogy problems from IQ tests.
And what happened?
They ended up essentially hard-coding the logic, the complex, abstract rule-finding that the test was supposed to measure in the human test taker. That was actually done by the engineer who analyzed the problem and figured out the solution strategy. The AI program was just executing the engineer's pre-digested solution.
So the fundamental assumption of the test that the problem was novel to the entity being tested was completely violated.
Precisely. The system wasn't demonstrating intelligence. It was demonstrating the engineer's intelligence. This really underscores why that developer-aware generalization concept is so vital for meaningful evaluation. You have to ensure the novelty holds for the entire system, including its creators.
Okay, this paints a pretty critical picture. It suggests that the current big pushes in AI, the high-profile moonshots focused on the games like Go, StarCraft, Dota 2, they might be impressive engineering feats, but perhaps a bit of a blind spot if the goal is general intelligence.
That's the strong implication, yes. These efforts are pouring immense resources into optimizing peak skill within a very complex but ultimately closed system, given virtually unlimited data and computation. They're not explicitly optimizing for generalization efficiency or adaptation to true novelty.
You mentioned OpenAI 5 for Dota 2 earlier as an example.
Yeah, it's a striking case study. It achieved superhuman performance after training for, the equivalent of 45,000 years of gameplay, and required a restricted version of the game rules. Yet, within days of it being available, even non-champion human players figured out simple counterintuitive strategies that reliably defeated it. Why? Because the humans could generalize and adapt to exploit the AI's predictable, albeit complex, patterns. The AI had incredible skill within its learned domain, but very little flexibility or robustness to strategies outside its massive training experience.
So high skill, low generalization, extreme brittleness when faced with something truly unexpected.
Exactly. And the argument is, if we keep pouring resources into achieving these kind of brittle, high-skill results, we're just measuring performance on metrics that are ultimately tangential, maybe even distracting, from the core challenge of developing broadly intelligent, adaptable systems. We're climbing the wrong hill, perhaps.
Okay, that sets the stage really well. We've seen the limitations of skill-based metrics. Now let's move into the proposed alternative. Formalizing intelligence as skill acquisition efficiency. How do we get away from just buying performance?
Right. If we didn't learn the lesson from Deep Blue back in '97 that solving chess didn't automatically grant general cognitive ability, then the current deep learning boom is forcing us to confront it again, but on a much grander scale. We need to formally recognize and crucially penalize the two main ways systems can achieve high performance without actually being intelligent in the general sense.
Which were, again, unlimited prior knowledge.
Right, the Deep Blue approach essentially building a static, highly optimized solution based on expert human knowledge, hard coding it.
And the second, more modern way, unlimited training data.
Yes, and this is arguably the more pervasive issue today. If a system's main strength is what we call local generalization,
Hmm?
just getting good at handling minor variations within a known data distribution, then you can often achieve seemingly human level or even superhuman skill on almost any specific task simply by drowning it in enough data.
Can you elaborate on that locality-sensitive hash table analogy you used earlier? How does that work in practice? What does it mean for something like, say, medical diagnosis AI?
Okay, imagine a giant lookup table, a hash table, for every possible input, let's say every possible configuration of pixels in a medical scan. It stores the correct output, the diagnosis. Now, obviously, you can't store every possible scan, but imagine this table is incredibly dense. It covers the space of typical scans really, really well. And it's locality sensitive, meaning if you input a scan that's not exactly in the table, it finds the closest match it does have stored and gives you that answer. A very large deep learning model, trained on millions or billions of labeled examples, can essentially learn to approximate such a massive, complex, locality-sensitive hash table. It gets incredibly good at mapping inputs it sees to outputs it's seen associated with similar inputs during training. So it might achieve 99% accuracy on diagnosing a specific condition from scans. But did it learn the underlying biology? Did it learn causal relationships? Did it develop an abstract concept of what disease is? Or did it just build a fantastically detailed statistical map connecting input patterns to output labels based on the training data?
It might just be doing sophisticated pattern matching, essentially retrieving the closest diagnosis it memorized during training.
Exactly. It solves the problem by finding a near neighbor in its vast high-dimensional memory, never needing to form the abstract rule or the causal understanding a human doctor uses. And if a system can reach high skill, primarily through this kind of massive statistical memorization rather than through efficient abstract rule discovery, then achieving high performance doesn't actually prove high intelligence. In fact, it might prove the opposite, that its information efficiency is very low, because it needed so much data to build that map.
So chasing skill by just throwing more data and compute at the problem, using current architectures, might just be building bigger and bigger lookup tables, taking us sideways, not forwards, towards general AI.
That's the core of the critique, yes. It produces brittle systems that are masters of local generalization, but lack the broad, flexible intelligence we're aiming for.
Okay, but if we're aiming for general intelligence, how general is general? Can we even aim for universal intelligence?
That's a crucial philosophical and practical point. The argument here is, no, we cannot and should not aim for universal intelligence. It's likely conceptually incoherent. Why? Well, think about the no-free lunch theorems from optimization theory. In essence, they state that any algorithm that performs exceptionally well on one class of problems must necessarily perform poorly on others. There's no universally superior problem solver.
Specialization always involves trade-offs.
Always. So even human general intelligence, the famous D-dollar factor, isn't universal intelligence. It's incredibly broad and flexible compared to any other known system, sure, but it's still highly specialized. It's specialized for the problems and environment relevant to an evolving, social, tool-using primate on planet Earth. We're not equipped to thrive on the surface of Venus or to solve problems in 11-dimensional space intuitively. Our generality has a scope shaped by evolution.
Like human physical fitness, we're adaptable, but not suited for every possible environment.
Perfect analogy. So the conclusion drawn here is that we need to accept an anthropocentric imperative for AI research, at least for now. We need to define a target scope for the intelligence we're trying to build and measure. And the only scope we can really meaningfully understand, assess, and approach is the space of tasks and problems relevant to humans. Trying to define or build an AI that's intelligent by some abstract cosmic standard is probably a futile exercise.
So the practical goal should be to define, measure, and develop a specifically human-like form of general intelligence, focusing on the kinds of cognitive abilities humans possess.
That's the argument. Ground the problem in the one example of general intelligence we actually know.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier that human intelligence isn't a blank slate. It relies on innate priors. How does that fit into this new framework?
It's absolutely central. This perspective tries to bridge that historical gap we discussed. The efficient general learner isn't purely specialized, like Minsky's Society of Mind, nor is it a purely blank slate, like the naive neural network view. It's a system that uses a set of innate, foundational priors, basic assumptions about the world, to bootstrap learning and enable rapid, efficient generalization from limited experience. These priors aren't a limitation, they are the source of generalization power.
They provide the essential structure for learning to occur efficiently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which leads to a critical point for evaluation.
Yeah.
If we want to fairly compare human intelligence and artificial intelligence, or even compare different AI systems, we need to somehow control for, or at least account for, these priors. A system that lacks the basic intuitive physics humans possess is at a massive disadvantage. Conversely, a system that has too much task-specific knowledge hard-coded beyond those basic priors isn't being fairly tested either. That's just the engineer solving the problem again.
So we need a baseline, a set of assumed foundational knowledge that any system being tested for human-like general intelligence should possess. Where do we get that baseline?
The sources lean heavily on developmental psychology, specifically on the work of researchers like Elizabeth Spelk and Susan Kinsler on core knowledge. Their research suggests that human infants are born with, or develop very early, a set of fundamental, evolutionarily ancient systems for understanding the world.
Okay, what are these core knowledge systems, the essential priors?
The proposal focuses on 4 key systems. 1. Objectness and elementary physics. This is the intuitive understanding that the world contains distinct objects that tend to move as connected wholes, cohesion, that they continue to exist even when hidden, persistence, and that solid objects can't pass through each other, they interact through contact. A system needing to learn these basics from scratch would be incredibly inefficient.
Makes sense. What's next?
2. Agentness and goal-directedness. This is the innate tendency to interpret the behavior of certain entities, usually animate ones, as being driven by intentions and goals, and assuming they act somewhat efficiently to achieve those goals. This is fundamental for social reasoning, prediction, and learning from others.
Okay, 3.
3. Natural numbers and elementary arithmetic. This isn't about learned mathematics, but the basic innate capacity to represent and reason about small quantities, distinguishing 1 from 2, 2 from 3, and understanding basic operations like adding or removing items,
Right.
often called number sense or subitizing. Infants seem to have this.
Right, the basics of quantity.
And the last one.
4. Elementary geometry and topology. Again, not formal geometry, but the fundamental spatial intuitions. Notions of distance, direction, orientation, symmetry, containment, basic shapes, how objects navigate in 2D or 3D space. It's the foundation for spatial reasoning and navigation. So the idea for a fair test of general intelligence is that it should assume the system already possesses these 4 core knowledge domains, perhaps built in as priors. And the test should then measure how efficiently the system can combine and apply these priors to solve novel problems.
That's exactly the idea. Test the use of these priors in new situations, not the learning of the priors themselves. This levels the playing field and focuses the evaluation on the higher-level reasoning and abstraction abilities that constitute fluid intelligence.
Okay, now we have all the pieces. The critique of skill, the focus on efficiency, the need for developer-aware generalization, the role of priors. How does this all come together in a formal definition of intelligence?
So we arrive at the synthesis. The core definition proposed is this. Intelligence is the efficiency with which a system converts its priors and its accumulated experience into new skills across a defined scope of valuable tasks, particularly tasks that involve uncertainty and require generalization.
Efficiency of converting information, priors plus experience, into skills, especially generalization. How do we make that mathematically precise? You mentioned algorithmic information theory, AIT.
Yes, AIT provides the theoretical toolkit. It deals with the concept of algorithmic complexity, also known as Kolmogorov complexity, usually denoted as $on. Very roughly, the Kolmogorov complexity of objects, say like a string of data or even a program, is the length of the shortest possible computer program written in a fixed optimal description language, like on a universal Turing machine, that can produce $6 as output and then halt.
So it's like the ultimate measure of compression, the minimum amount of information needed to perfectly describe something.
That's a great way to think about it. It measures the inherent complexity, the irreducible information content of an object or process. If something is highly patterned or repetitive, its complexity is low. If it's random or highly novel, its complexity is high.
Okay, how do we use this complexity measure to quantify the components of our intelligence definition, generalization difficulty, priors, and experience? Let's start with generalization difficulty, GD dollars. That sounds key.
It is key, and probably the most theoretically involved part. GD dollars is defined formally using relative algorithmic complexity. Conceptually, what it's trying to capture is the amount of irreducible surprise or novelty contained in the evaluation tasks compared to the training tasks. How much new information does the system need to incorporate to go from solving the training set to solving the full task, including the unseen evaluation examples?
Okay, how is that measured using complexity?
The formal idea involves comparing the complexity of two hypothetical optimal programs. First, the shortest program that perfectly solves only the training examples, trains 11 days Z2. Second, the shortest program that solves the entire task, including both training and the novel evaluation examples. The generalization difficulty is essentially related to the difference in length, in bits according to AIT, between these two optimal programs.
Wow, okay, that's quite abstract. Can you give us the intuition? If GGLers is high, what does that mean about the task?
High G dollars means the evaluation examples contain significant novelty that couldn't be easily predicted or compressed based only on the training examples. To solve the evaluation examples correctly, the system can't just slightly tweak its training solution. It needs to discover a genuinely new rule, a deeper abstraction, a more general principle. It requires a significant edit to the optimal training program. If GG dollars are low, it means the evaluation examples are just more of the same, predictable from the training data. The optimal program for training is already very close to the optimal program for the whole task. The task requires little true generalization.
So a task with high G dollars is one where simply interpolating or pattern matching based on the training data will fail. You need to reason or abstract to bridge the gap to the test cases.
Exactly. High G dollar tasks are those that demand genuine cognitive effort, abstraction, and insight to solve efficiently. Low G dollar tasks might be complex computationally, but don't require significant generalization.
Let me try an analogy. Suppose a human looks at 3 examples of a visual puzzle and instantly gets the rule, solving the 4th test example in seconds. An AI churns through millions of parameters and gigabytes of data, maybe needing thousands of gradient descent steps, to eventually find a function that fits all 4 examples. Is the argument that the human solution, while perhaps complex to articulate, is algorithmically shorter or has lower complexity because it successfully compressed the underlying rule and anticipated the test case's novelty?
That's precisely the intuition. The human, by finding the abstract rule, generated a very short, powerful program that generalizes. The AI, by perhaps brute forcing a complex function that fits the points without understanding the rule, generated a much longer, less compressible program specific to those examples. The human efficiently conquered the high G dollars. The AI maybe didn't, or did so very inefficiently.
Okay, that clarifies G dollars. Now what about priors? How do we measure the information content of the system's starting state without needing the Kolmogorov complexity of, say, GPT-4's entire weight matrix?
Right. Calculating the true Kolmogorov complexity of a massive neural network is impossible. So POGRs is defined more pragmatically. It's viewed as the fraction of the final solution's complexity that can be explained or compressed by the system's initial state, IST2. Crucially, it focuses only on the relevant priors. If you have a giant pre-trained language model, seems high, but you're testing it on abstract grid puzzles like ARC, most of its language knowledge is irrelevant. The definition aims to penalize that irrelevant complexity. POGR should only reflect the complexity of the initial state components that actually contribute to solving the task scope efficiently.
So it's not just about the size of the starting system, but about how much of its initial structure is usefully aligned with the problems it needs to solve. A well-structured system with the right priors, like core knowledge, would have a relevant dollars, even if small. A huge generic system might have a large total complexity, but a small relevant dollars for a specific task scope.
Exactly. It rewards well-designed initial structure, not just scale.
And the final variable, experience, E-Buller. How is that measured information theoretically?
$E represents the total amount of relevant, novel information the system absorbs from its environment, i.e. the training data or interaction, during the skill acquisition process. The key here is novelty. We don't just count the number of training examples or interaction steps. We need to measure the information content of that experience, penalizing redundancy. If a system needs to see 100 almost identical examples to learn a simple rule that a more intelligent system learns from just one or two, the first system has consumed a much higher effective ADO. It was information inefficient in its learning.
So E measures the cost of learning in terms of information gain. A smarter system needs less novel information, lower E, to reach the same skill level.
Precisely. High intelligence means achieving high skill, especially on high GDO tasks, with minimal information input, both from priors and experience.
Okay, putting it all together. The proposed intelligence metric is roughly proportional to the average, taken over the whole scope of relevant tasks of task value times, generalization difficulty divided by priors plus experience, Whitall, Procto, text average over scope, text value plus eJoller.
That's the formula capturing the core intuition. A high intelligence system is one that consistently achieves high performance on valuable tasks, weighted by value, on problems with high generalization difficulty, while minimizing the information resources required, both the built-in information and the information gathered during learning.
So intelligence is fundamentally a conversion rate. How efficiently does the system convert information, PPOP plus eGel, into the ability to handle novelty?
That's a perfect summary. It reframes intelligence not as a static capability or a performance level, but as a dynamic measure of learning and adaptation efficiency. It mathematically formalizes the critique of buying performance with infinite doll or A dollars.
What are the practical implications adopting this definition for AI research? It seems like a massive shift.
It really demands a shift in focus. Firstly, it strongly pushes towards program synthesis as a core AI paradigm. Why? Because it forces us to clearly separate the intelligent system, the process that learns and generalizes, the thing that converts a $1 plus E into solutions from the skill program, the specific artifact or policy network that results from the learning process and performs the task. The intelligence lies in the synthesizer, not just the synthesized program.
We need to build systems that write efficient, generalizable programs from minimal data rather than just systems that are a single, massive, pattern-fitting program.
Exactly. Secondly, it inherently validates and encourages research into things like curriculum learning and active learning. Why? Because finding a better curriculum, a sequence of experiences that presents novel information more efficiently, directly reduces the required $8 for the system to learn. A better teacher makes the student appear more intelligent, according to this metric.
It provides a formal framework for asking rigorous questions about any AI system. What is its intended scope? What are its relevant priors? How efficiently does it learn from experience? How well does it handle genuine novelty allow? It moves beyond just asking, what's its score on benchmark X?
Right. It encourages characterizing systems by their underlying information processing efficiency and generalization capabilities.
Okay, theory laid out. Now, how do we actually measure this in practice? This brings us to the proposed benchmark, the Abstraction and Reasoning Corpus, ARC. What is it, and how is it designed to embody these principles?
ARC is really interesting because it's presented as three things in one: a general AI benchmark, a program synthesis benchmark, and essentially a psychometric intelligence test for AI, explicitly inspired by things like Raven's progressive matrices.
Okay, what does a task actually look like?
It's very minimalist visually. Each task involves transforming input grids into output grids. These are small grids, maybe up to 30 by 30 pixels, filled with different colors. The system has shown a few example pairs, typically just 2 or 3, demonstrating the transformation rule for that specific task.
Only 2 or 3 examples. That's really forcing few-shot learning.
Extremely few-shot, yes. That's intentional. And then the system has to predict the correct output grid for one or more new test input grids for that same task. Crucially, success is binary. You either produce the exact correct output grid for all test inputs, or you get 0 points for that task. No partial credit.
Very strict. And the scale.
Tiny by modern machine learning standards. The public training set has only 400 unique tasks. The hidden evaluation set used for actual scoring has another 600 unique tasks. Each task represents a different abstract rule or concept.
And how does this setup enforce the theoretical principles we discussed, like developer-aware generalization and controlled experience?
Well, the developer-aware generalization is enforced primarily by keeping the 600 evaluation tasks private. The developers building the AI system do not know what those tasks are. They can only train on the 400 public tasks. This prevents them from tuning or hard-coding solutions for the specific evaluation problems.
Okay, so the novelty for the evaluation tasks is guaranteed, at least relative to the developer's knowledge.
Exactly. And the experience is quantitatively controlled. The number of training examples per task is fixed and tiny, average 3.3. And during evaluation, the system is typically allowed only 3 attempts to solve each test input grid. If it fails after 3 tries, it gets 0 for the task.
So you can't just brute force the answer by trying millions of things. You have to infer the underlying abstract rule very quickly from very little data, demonstrating high efficiency is low.
Precisely. It forces the system to perform abstract reasoning and program induction, not just pattern recognition on big data.
Now, what about the priors? How does ARC account for the core knowledge domains we discussed? Does it assume them?
Yes, it's designed explicitly around the assumption that a system attempting ARC should have these core knowledge priors built in. The tasks themselves are constructed using concepts drawn directly from those 4 domains.
Can you give examples of how the simple grid format tests those priors?
Sure. For objectness in physics, many tasks require identifying contiguous blocks of the same color as distinct objects. A task might involve moving an object until it hits another contact, filling enclosed regions, or removing noise pixels while keeping main objects intact. Persistence cohesion. The grid acts as a simple 2D physics world.
Okay.
For agentness goal directedness, this is maybe more subtle, but the input-to-output transformation often implies some kind of intended or efficient process, like finding the single different object, completing a pattern in the simplest way, or moving an object along the shortest path. The system needs to infer the implicit goal. For numbers counting, this is very common. Tasks involve counting objects, usually small numbers, less than 10, linking to innate number sense, sorting objects by size or count, repeating patterns a certain number of times, finding the object that occurs n times, etc.
And geometry topology.
That's visually the most obvious one. Tasks are full of symmetries, reflectional, rotational, rotations 90, 180 degrees, translations, scaling objects up or down, detecting lines or shapes, notions of inside, outside, containment, adjacency, connectivity. A huge part of ARC involves recognizing and applying these basic geometric transformations.
So, by building tasks from these primitives, ARC isn't testing whether the AI can learn object permanence from scratch. It's testing whether the AI, assuming it understands object permanence and basic geometry, can reason with these concepts to solve novel abstract problems.
Exactly. It focuses the test on the fluid reasoning part, leveraging the assumed priors.
How does this design make ARC different from those earlier failed attempts at psychometric AI using human IQ tests? What pitfalls does it avoid?
It tries to avoid several key pitfalls. First, as we just discussed, it focuses only on fluid intelligence, using abstract grids. It deliberately avoids language, real-world knowledge, cultural biases, or other crystallized abilities that often contaminate human IQ tests and are easy for AI developers to just scrape from the web and bake in.
Okay, pure abstraction.
Second, and absolutely critical, is the private evaluation set. The tasks are unique and genuinely unknown to the developers. This directly counters the main failure of PAI, where engineers effectively solve the known IQ test problems themselves and just program the solutions.
Enforcing developer-aware generalization.
Third, the diversity and scale. While 400 training tasks isn't huge by ML standards, the conceptual diversity is very broad. There are hundreds of distinct abstract rules. This makes it much harder to find a single simple trick or heuristic that solves many tasks. You can't just hard-code solutions for a few types of problems. You need a more general reasoning capability.
Harder to game the test.
Fourth, the way the tasks were created. Many were generated manually by humans thinking about core knowledge concepts. This makes them less likely to follow a simple, easily reverse-engineered programmatic pattern, unlike some other abstract reasoning tests where you might be able to figure out the underlying generator function.
Okay, so if a system could reliably solve ARC tasks, say, perform at a human level, what would that actually imply about the system's architecture? What kind of AI would that be?
The strong hypothesis put forward is that a successful ARC solver wouldn't look much like current deep learning systems, which are primarily based on optimizing continuous functions, like neural network weights. Instead, it would likely need to be a form of program synthesis engine.
Program synthesis, meaning it writes code.
Essentially, yes. It would need to operate over a domain-specific language, or DSL. Think of a DSL as a carefully chosen set of basic building blocks primitive functions that embody those core knowledge concepts we talked about.
Like functions for find objects by color, rotate object 90 degrees, check symmetry, count items, move until contact, things like that.
Exactly those kinds of things. Highly abstract, Compositional primitives related to objects, geometry, counting, etc. The ARC system's task then would be, given the 2 or 3 input-output examples for a task, efficiently search the space of possible programs constructible from this DSL to find the shortest or simplest program that correctly explains the examples and generalizes to the test cases.
So the intelligence is the efficiency and success rate of the search process for the right abstract program.
Precisely. It's about inducing symbolic compositional programs from very sparse data. And the claim is that current deep learning methods are fundamentally ill-suited for this kind of discrete, symbolic, highly abstract program induction, especially in a few-shot setting. They excel at fuzzy pattern matching in high dimensions, not crisp logical rule inference.
That's a big claim that humans solve ARC easily, but current ML struggles massively. It really highlights a potential architectural gap.
It points towards needing systems that can combine perception, parsing the grid, with more symbolic reasoning and planning, searching for the right program.
Okay, this sounds promising as a concept, but especially for our PhD student listener doing a critical literature review, we absolutely must address the weaknesses and limitations of ARC. The proposal itself is quite open about these, right?
Yes, commendably so. The authors are clear that ARC is a first step and has significant limitations that need future work. These fall into roughly 4 main areas, mostly centered on validation and the practical application of the underlying AIT theory.
What's the first major weakness?
The first is that the key theoretical metric, generalization difficulty, GDOLR, is currently not quantified for ARC tasks. We can intuitively say task A seems harder or requires more abstraction than task B, but we don't have a numerical GDOL value for each task derived from algorithmic information theory. This is a major gap because the whole theoretical framework hinges on GDOLR dollars. Without quantifying it, the intelligence formula .propto text value d.gd p plus e can't actually be calculated.
So how could G$ be quantified in the future? That sounds incredibly difficult, measuring the Kolmogorov complexity of optimal solutions.
It's extremely challenging, yes. True Kolmogorov complexity is uncomputable. The path forward likely involves finding good approximations or proxies. One idea mentioned is to collect large amounts of human performance data on ARC tasks, things like solution times, error rates, subjective difficulty ratings. The hope is that these empirical measures of human perceived difficulty might correlate strongly with the underlying theoretical GDOLR. If you can establish that correlation, you could use the human data to assign approximate GDOLR scores to tasks, which would then allow you to actually compute the intelligence metric of dollars for different AI systems. But this requires significant empirical work that hasn't been done yet.
Okay, so quantifying GD is a major hurdle. What's the second weakness?
Second is test validity. Like any new psychometric test, ARC's validity hasn't been established. Does scoring well on ARC actually predict success on other real-world cognitive tasks? Does it correlate with human trial factor scores? Does it predict which AI architectures are likely to be more generally capable? We just don't know yet. Establishing validity requires large-scale statistical studies comparing ARC scores against other measures of intelligence and real-world performance, following standard psychometric validation protocols. Until then, it's an interesting benchmark, but its predictive power is hypothetical.
Fair enough. Third limitation.
Third is the closed-ended binary format of the current ARC evaluation. You get 1 point for perfect success, 0 otherwise. This lacks granularity. A system that solves it instantly on the first try gets the same score as one that struggles and only gets it right on the third allowed attempt. It doesn't capture the efficiency aspect very well within a single task.
How could that be improved?
The authors suggest moving towards a more interactive, curriculum-controlled format for evaluation. Instead of a fixed set of test tasks, the system would interact with an evaluator that adaptively presents tasks, maybe starting easy and getting harder based on the system's performance. The score wouldn't just be the number of tasks solved, but perhaps a measure of the total amount of interaction, feedback, or examples the system required to reach a certain level of reliable performance across a range of difficulties. This would provide a much richer, more continuous measure of skill acquisition efficiency.
That sounds like a much better fit for the theoretical definition. And the final weakness.
The fourth weakness goes back to the foundation: core knowledge uncertainty. While the idea of using core knowledge priors is appealing, the exact nature, number, and content of these innate human priors are still subjects of active research and debate in developmental psychology and cognitive science. Did ARC choose the right set of priors? Were they represented correctly in the tasks? Are there other crucial innate abilities that ARC misses? If the assumed foundation is shaky or incomplete, then the fairness of the comparison between human and AI performance on ARC could be compromised.
Okay, so significant open questions remain about GD quantification, validity, evaluation format, and the exact nature of the priors. That's crucial context for anyone evaluating this approach. Beyond ARC itself, did the source material suggest other ways to apply this efficiency-focused mindset to AI evaluation, maybe using existing setups?
Yes, it proposed two interesting conceptual alternatives. The first is basically repurposing existing skill benchmarks. Take something complex where AI has achieved high skill, like a video game, say StarCraft or Dota 2, or a physics simulation environment. Instead of just measuring peak performance in that specific game after massive training, we evaluate the system differently. We measure how efficiently it can learn to play a new, related but distinct game, X $2 that was unknown to the developers beforehand, using its training on the first game, X as its prior experience.
So train on Dota 2, but test its learning speed and data efficiency when trying to master League of Legends, or maybe even a completely different genre like a real-time strategy game if the initial training was broader. The score is about the transfer efficiency.
Exactly. The focus shifts from absolute skill on one task to the rate of skill acquisition on novel tasks within a related domain. This requires tasks with high GFER relative to the initial training task, and critically, the evaluation tasks, $60 must be unknown to the developers to ensure genuine novelty and measure developer-aware generalization. It leverages existing complex environment but reframes the evaluation objective around efficiency.
That seems like a practical way to start applying these ideas. What was the second alternative?
The second was framed as an open-ended adversarial approach. This sounds a bit like some existing ideas like generative adversarial networks or systems like OpenAI's PO8 paired open-ended Trailblazer, but specifically focused on optimizing for skill acquisition efficiency. You'd have a student program, the AI being evaluated, and a teacher program. The teacher's job is to programmatically generate new tasks or environments that are maximally challenging and informative for the current state of the student. The tasks are designed to push the student's boundaries and accelerate its learning.
So the teacher learns to create tasks with high GG dollars specifically targeted at the student's weaknesses.
Precisely. But here's the crucial addition from this perspective. To prevent this adversarial process from collapsing or finding trivial loopholes, the teacher needs to continually draw new complexity from some external source. This source needs to be effectively incompressible and unpredictable. Maybe it's real-world data streams, complex physics simulations, or even human interaction.
Why is the external source so important?
To ensure the tasks remain genuinely novel and open-ended over the long term. Without it, the teacher and student might just converge to some stable, complex, but ultimately closed loop, not driving towards broader generalization. The external source keeps injecting fresh, unpredictable challenges, forcing the student to continually improve its general skill acquisition efficiency, rather than just mastering the teacher's current generation tricks.
It creates a dynamic arms race, but one where the weapon being improved is a student's fundamental ability to learn and adapt efficiently to novelty.
Exactly. It's a conceptual framework for driving the evolution of intelligence through adaptive, open-ended challenges focused on learning efficiency.
Okay, we've covered a huge amount of ground. From the historical problems in defining and measuring AI intelligence, through a critique of skill-based metrics, to this new proposed framework based on skill acquisition efficiency using AIT concepts, and finally looking at ARC and other potential evaluation methods.
It's definitely a paradigm shift being proposed.
Mm.
To quickly synthesize the main takeaway, the argument is that intelligence shouldn't be equated with raw performance or skill, because skill can often be bought with excessive priors or experience. Instead, intelligence should be defined and measured as the efficiency with which a system converts information, plus EI is to the ability to generalize and solve novel problems. High GD dollars, particularly within a scope grounded in human-like cognition and assuming core knowledge priors. This necessitates moving towards benchmarks like ARC that test few-shot program synthesis and developer-aware generalization.
The whole focus shifts, doesn't it? From optimizing the final product, the trained model, the artifact, to optimizing the process itself, the learning algorithm, the program synthesizer, the engine of intelligence. The goal becomes maximizing generalization power per unit of information consumed.
Precisely. Maximum intelligence means achieving the broadest possible generalization with the minimum possible information cost.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you, the listener, to ponder. If this perspective is right, and if we could actually succeed in rigorously quantifying that generalization difficulty for various abstract tasks, how might that fundamentally change the way we design AI architectures?
Think about it. If the main objective function we're optimizing for explicitly includes maximizing performance on high digital tasks while minimizing talent dollars, what kinds of architectures does that favor? Does it inherently push us away from purely connectionist systems and towards hybrid architectures that explicitly integrate symbolic reasoning, logic, or causal inference capabilities alongside neural networks? Would achieving high G-dollars efficiently require something like explicit program synthesis or symbolic manipulation to get the necessary level of abstraction and compressibility that pure pattern matching might lack? If we change the measure, we might be forced to invent entirely different kinds of AI minds.
A powerful question indeed. If we change how we measure intelligence, do we inevitably change what intelligence we create? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the measure of intelligence beyond mere skill. We'll see you next time.